The Pope who put a corpse on trial. What if I told you the holiest institution on earth once held a trial for a dead man? This isn't a horror movie. This is a story of a pope so consumed by hatred that he ordered his predecessor's 9-month-old corpse to be dug up from its grave, dressed in sacred robes, and propped up on a throne to face his judgment. You're about to discover the darkest chapter the Vatican wants you to forget. A pope whose rotting body was put on trial, screamed at, found guilty, and then mutilated in a spectacle of revenge so insane, it makes Game of Thrones look like a church picnic. Get ready for Cadaver Synod, a true story of papal madness that proves even God's chosen representative can be a monster. And if you're ready to uncover more of the horrifying truths that history tried to bury, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what you've been taught is a lie. To understand this madness, you have to understand Pope Stephen VI's burning, psychopathic hatred for his predecessor, Pope Formosus. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. This was a war of political factions that had torn Rome apart. Formosus, while he was alive, had crowned a rival emperor, an act Stephen saw as the ultimate betrayal. But for a man like Stephen, death was not an excuse to escape justice. In his twisted mind, Formosus's crimes were so great, his soul so stained, that even his rotting corpse had to be held accountable. This wasn't about divine justice. It was about political annihilation. Stephen needed to not only kill his enemy's reputation, but to literally erase him from existence. He would prove to all of Rome that Formosus was a heretic, and that his body was not even worthy of a Christian burial. He would make an example so terrifying that no one would ever dare cross him again. In January of 897, the doors of the Basilica of St. John Lateran swung open not for a holy mass, but for the most blasphemous trial in human history. Imagine the scene. Cardinals and bishops are forced to their seats, their faces pale with terror. And there on the papal throne sits the guest of honor, the decomposing corpse of Pope Formosus. His body, 9 months into its decay, was bloated and discolored. The stench of putrefaction was so overwhelming that courtiers held perfume cloths to their faces, gagging. Servants had dressed the stiff, rotting limbs in splendid papal vestments, the fine silk clinging to patches of liquefying flesh. His vacant eyes stared out from a gray, sagging face, and standing before him, screaming accusations of perjury and ambition, was a living pope, Stephen VI, his eyes wide with madness. But here's the truly insane part. The dead pope needed a defense attorney. A terrified, trembling young deacon was forced to hide behind the throne, tasked with answering the charges on behalf of the corpse. For hours, Stephen hurled questions at the rotting body. "Why did you usurp the universal Roman see in such a spirit of ambition?" he would shriek. And from behind the throne, the deacon would squeak out a terrified, pre-written response. It was a kangaroo court from hell. Of course, the verdict was never in doubt. The corpse of Pope Formosus was found guilty. And now, the punishment had to be carried out. This is where the story descends into a nightmare. First, servants swarmed the throne and violently tore the sacred vestments from the corpse's body, ripping the fragile, decaying flesh in the process. He was posthumously stripped of his rank. But Stephen wasn't finished. He strode over to the mutilated corpse and ordered a guard to hold up its right hand. This was the hand Formosus had used for holy blessings. With a cry of fury, Stephen took an axe and personally hacked off the 3 blessing fingers. The sound of blade chopping through bone and desiccated flesh echoed through the silent, horrified basilica. The desecration was still not complete. The guards then dragged the violated corpse out of the basilica through the streets of Rome, and with one final curse, threw the body of the former pope into murky Tiber River, to be lost forever. You'd think the story ends there, but this is where it gets even stranger. Stephen thought he had won, but it seems Pope Formosus got his revenge from beyond the grave. You don't learn this in history class, but immediately after the trial, a massive earthquake shook Rome, severely damaging the very basilica where the synod was held. The superstitious Roman populace saw it as a sign from God. They weren't horrified by Formosus anymore. They were horrified by their living maniacal pope. They whispered that the mutilated corpse had cursed the city. The chaos didn't end there. A few months later, a monk reportedly fished the body of Formosus from the Tiber, claiming it had miraculously washed ashore. The corpse was seen as a holy relic, a martyr. The political factions that supported Formosus rose up, and the people of Rome rioted. Stephen VI's reign came to a brutal end. He was overthrown, thrown into a dungeon, and in the summer of 897, less than a year after his grotesque trial, he was strangled to death in his cell. The man who tried to mutilate and erase his enemy from history was himself violently erased. It's a terrifying lesson. When you dig up a monster, you never know if it will drag you back down into the grave with it. The Cadaver Synod isn't just a bizarre footnote in history. It's a masterclass in how absolute power can create absolute, terrifying madness.